from our morning, and you had lots of questions about our infrastructure and how we were able to implement our iPad initiative into our existing network. One story I like to say is some of the equipment that we're running in our closets, our technicians only read about in books. Like, wow, what is that? I've only read about that. Yeah, that's the kind of infrastructure that we were running when we took over this task. Many of you had a lot of questions about who's who, and so now I'm proud to give you the faces of the who's who on the org chart you saw earlier, okay? So a lot of questions about who's my Power School person and that project manager. We need to see that person. That is Mrs. Maria Tata right here, so that you can see exactly who she is. The engineer, kind of the master behind the curtain, who makes all of that stuff happen. That would be my network administrator and systems specialist, Mr. Chris Fainer. Where is my technology technician? Out there, running down tickets, figuring things out. That would be Mr. Lyle Evans. We thought it was really important to give kids, I have a GT background, and taught gifted ed in our district for a while. It's really important for us, and in my personal philosophy, we give type 2 experiences for you GT people out there, practicing like the professional. How can you use and give kids real world applications and opportunities within your district? And I saw EdTech as a place to do that. We worked hard with our career and tech ed department, or business department in particular, where the computer application skills are, the entrepreneur, the finance, all of those great courses. How do we build opportunities for kids? And that is designing a help desk where kids get real world experiences working alongside the professionals that do this every day. How can I have kids sit in and network with other districts to learn and find out what's happening? I am proud to bring 3 of our finest seniors here to you today to talk to you about their experiences, because without them, I'm not so sure we'd be in fantastic shape today. I have with me Kevin Eichhart, PJ Kingsbury, and Tom Peck. Maria, over to you.
Okay, good morning. So, for those of you who were here earlier, you know that we do have an iPad initiative and a one-to-one. You're here today to talk about how we got there. So let's start with Coventry Public Schools. We're a K-12 organization. We support 4 schools. As you may have heard, a lot of our team is new. And so about a year ago, our administrative team came to us and they said, hey, we've got this great project. We've decided we really need to enhance the teaching and learning. We need to put some great technology tools in the hands of our teachers and our students. We're going to have iPads, one-to-one at the high school for a grade, and we're going to do a cart concept for our K-8 group. We said, awesome! And then we ran in the back room and we went, oh my God, do they know what that really means? Our infrastructure obviously is very old. The school is old. We have a running joke that actually one of our team members actually was a student at the school and probably hasn't seen much change since then. So really, we know what the deliverable was, but how do we get there? So the team's going to take you through that journey today. We're going to talk about how we figured out what is it that we currently have, what needs to be replaced, how do we get the business need met, and do it successfully by the start of the school year. So it is a work in progress. I will tell you that our one IT deliverable that we all agreed upon was whatever we pick needs to be a modular type solution, because the business requirements will change. So we'll get to the end of the year and then the administrative team's going to be like, oh, okay, well, we want to do this, this, and this now. So we wanted to be able to really have a plug and play type of system. And we'll talk to you a little bit about why we made certain choices to do the things that we did. This really is just one way to do things. It's the way we chose for certain reasons, but there are other options available. And so in the interest of time, because we have a lot of material to get through, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and you'll hear from him and some of the kids.
So I just wanted to start with, obviously there was sort of a simple idea. We wanted to use iPads. There was, sort of simple things that people wanted to do. and you start asking those questions, and it becomes a lot more difficult or a lot more complicated than you really started envisioning. There's a lot more back-end stuff that has to exist in order for something simple like that to be able to use it effectively. So, it was one of the benefits that we actually had in this district is this is all new technology team. This is all new team that came in essentially to sort of redo everything. We had sort of exciting things to be able to work on, but we had a chance to actually sort of step in and sort of even step back a little bit and be able to evaluate just about everything. Everything became an option. Everything became possible. We were not going to say we're absolutely hard-coded this way or absolutely hard-coded that way. I think the biggest thing is that we wanted, just like Maria was saying, we wanted to create a modular system because we did not have all the pieces. We didn't have the historical information at all to sort of base our decisions on. We had a lot of stuff that was missing. We had information, passwords, historical, who we bought stuff from, all kinds of stuff that was not there exactly. So, we were able to step in and sort of design a new infrastructure, a new way to even do everything we were doing. So the biggest thing is that our groups that we're even dealing with are very varied. They're very modularized themselves. If you think about the high schools, the grammar schools, they're very dedicated to the age levels that they're dealing with and what applications they're using and how they're delivering even to the children. They deliver in different ways to them. So, and then there's also the back end pieces. There's lots of information technology pieces, lots of information about the students, lots of purchasing, lots of ownership of things. That was all modularized too. That was all over the place. So part of the biggest thing we had to do was control all of that. I think that was sort of obvious that everyone was going in a different direction. So the biggest thing was trying to understand the costs of, that was probably the biggest thing that's driving a lot of what we're going to be discussing is lowering the cost of all these different pieces. So we were able to step back, I think, and just sort of examine, it's not just a school system. There's information technology is pretty universal in a lot of different fields. So, we were drawing from information from other school systems about how they did things, how did they implement iPads, how did they implement this, we certainly went out and asked those questions, but there's lots of other businesses that are out there and how they did stuff. We had other experience from other institutions that we've worked at that we were able to draw those experiences from.
And I just want to jump in there and say, Krista did not come to us from an educational environment, and I think that was one of the benefits of that. Not knowing what the educational field looked like and the scope of what happened here, like a new fresh set of eyes on the scene, I think was really helpful in taking a look at, in this particular spot, it's like, okay, you've got all this aging hardware, which we've addressed, but you've got this whole other side of the users and the people. And earlier I had talked about how we've got programs and systems that are like 12 years old. And that's all those people know how to use. So you've got to kind of blend that with, we've got to upgrade this, but they have to be trained, but they got to keep up because it's moving and changing. So there's a balancing out there. So I think it was really helpful discourse that we have pretty much on a daily basis.
Even to add to that, I think, one thing I probably skipped over is really who we're dealing with. There's lots of staff had very different skill levels. They had very different backgrounds from where they came from. We've had some that came from Google schools, we had some from Microsoft schools, had some that used Apple exclusively. So, and then we have a lot of students who are on the same lines. They come in and they all had their own skill sets. They wanted to be able to use the things that they were used to. I mean, how you present yourself to other people. You don't want to necessarily have to guess while you're doing it. You don't want to have to sit there and figure out, I got to change it like this, and while I'm trying to go through a lesson plan for the year, it's too difficult for people to make those changes while they're trying to do those things. So it was, we're trying to unify, or accommodate really is all those different skill levels and sort of construct something that we can still use every little bit piece of everything that everybody's trying to do. So I think we stepping back, we were able to go back and we really wanted to look at what other institutions were using, what other methods they were doing. Because, even though we had sort of an immediate need to try and accomplish something very quickly, we still wanted to be able to do it the right way. We didn't want to just go throw something in and have it backfire on us later. We wanted to at least have the opportunity to step in and sort of follow a pattern of what other institutions are doing. So, one of the biggest things you probably hear in the IT world is what is referred to ITIL, or Information Technology Information Library. It's a standardization of how to manage information technology systems, how to control them, how to control the cost of those things. This is a topic that we could just sit here all day and probably into next week on. So what I'm really trying to focus on is that there was a standard out there that we've used before, and that other people have used before, and that we were going to try to follow that as much as we could. And underneath that part is really the ITSM, Information Technology Service Management piece, that we really focus on. And there's other things that are part of the ITIL standard, but what we're really trying to focus on is the IT service management piece today. That was probably the piece that was missing the most out of the infrastructure that we're dealing with here. This is more of an infrastructure question. There's more of an infrastructure topic that we're discussing. So those are the pieces that were just almost non-existent. So we have those other things, but we're really going to focus on ITSM. And under ITSM, it's also a very large subject, but we're going to focus on very specific needs, because we could spend all day. Everything again was under the sun was what we needed to get accomplished. So we're going to focus on some very critical pieces in order to do the iPad initiative. So the biggest part about ITSM specifically is creating procedures for just about everything. So you're writing a procedure to say so that it's worth repetition. So if someone's dealing with something, they follow that procedure in order to accommodate their issue or accommodate their need. So as we design things, as we design these new infrastructures, we want to be able to say, in order to do this piece, you follow these procedures. In order to do this piece, you follow these procedures. And that was, it seems a little bit common sense, and it is. But it was really sort of all over the place. Those procedures existed everywhere. They had them written down. They had them on shared drives. They had them on some websites. They had them all over the place. So it's unifying those procedures and making sure that everybody's aware where they are, and modifying them. That's probably the biggest thing that we had to aim for, is we did not know everything right at this moment. There's no way we can accommodate and solve all our issues right at this moment. We had initial things that we needed to accomplish, and we have to make a very flexible structure that we can modify later, so that we can modify our procedures as we went. So the thing that I would like to point out first, or the topic we'd like to bring up first, is our ticketing system. And the ticketing system is going to be probably the biggest thing is just asking for what? What are the problems that were existing? And this is even before we can start talking about wireless and updating the infrastructure, because once we start doing something that's going to affect everybody, they're going to ask us questions. They're going to ask us questions. They're going to have problems. How do I do this? How do I do that? We're going to have to figure out how to track those kinds of things. So actually, I'm going to pass it off to PJ, who's going to talk about that particular piece.
Our ticketing system before this year, I know that last year when we had our other guy like Lyle here, it was Mr. Holmes. He came in and people would just, teachers would send an email to him directly, and he'd come down maybe that day, maybe next week. It was whenever you really could get to it. And that, for the most part, was kind of a bad system. So this year we got around to choosing something that would be beneficial to our teachers and having them and being able to record everything that was needed from them and that they had around. So we wanted something that was like low cost, not really too much or too hard to use for the teachers. So we got a system called OTRS, and we can do it through an email or a web interface sort of thing. And of the web interface working, but it was really challenging at first. It is a Linux-based system, and we can modify it whenever we want. So going along with that aspect of it being modular and being able to change as the years progress is great.
I just want to point out, so it generates a lot of data for us on the back end to kind of pull reports out to kind of see and help us with those points of infrastructure, updates, where we are, how we're deploying personnel. Do we need more people? Do we need less people? Do we need more PD? What's going on here? So behind the scenes, it helps us make those informed decisions. So that's why we absolutely track everything. Maria's favorite line.
Gotta put a ticket in.
That's right.
Love to help you, but you need to put a ticket in. Gotta track the data.
Yeah, and all that data is actually sent to an open source database like SQL or MySQL. So it's very beneficial to us.
With that system, can a user go in and say they're having trouble, well, that's probably not good one, so they couldn't get on, but just say they were having trouble getting into their email, could they get onto the system and see what other people have done to get around that, or not?
The web interface is the portion that you was telling.
Yeah.
Actually having, the first step, we were just trying to get the email interface going so that they can issue us a request.
Yeah.
But the overall tracking and being able to view those tickets, that was going to be phase 2.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So the I forgot where I was. Yeah. So basically, this system, it allows us to track everything that all the tickets that come in, and they can also be reassigned by Lyle, Chris, Maria, and anyone else who has access. We're able to put in how much time and effort went into those when we close down the ticket, and that makes it easier for us to track if a paid professional is working on these, they can get paid for doing that time, those hours.
And can you also put what you've done to resolve the problem?
Yes, there is a comment section as well on there. Some of our staff is unpaid, like some of the teachers actually help out on doing the tickets, and so it's beneficial to help track just everything.
I think that you can see from the group here that we have a very wide variety of people who are actually supporting the system. So being able to patch things back and forth, and just being able to know what's in the system, because if everything was an email system before, it was impossible to track where it was, what stage it was, what they did on it. It was impossible. So, you can see from the variety of people we have here, I could pass it off to him, and he could say, PJ could say, I haven't been working on these things. He passes it back, and he passes it. So, that way, it was a system that we can actually keep track of. Where was this in its life cycle?
Now, did your help us have emails or students have emails?
Not yet, but that was going to come. So, but at the moment, it's only staff.
Is there a follow-up component to that? So after the ticket is closed, does the person that submitted the ticket get an email stating that it was done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, we send out an email to say that it is closed. It automates the system. And as we close it, it actually will send out an alert to say that the ticket was closed. And if it's closed in error, you can reopen it again and so forth. And there is an information exchange.
I wanted to point out though, that was part of the growing pains. We didn't do that at first.
Right.
And the teachers, through the district tech committee, said, okay, we're all about putting tickets in, but what's going on with my ticket? I'm not getting any feedback. I don't know what's happening with my ticket. So then, we come back on team and say, okay, we gotta fix, what can we do? We gotta fix this. So, adding that in as part of what the users needed was part of the process.
Now, can you track to see if, say, I submitted a ticket and then I got something that said it was closed, then I reply back and say, no, it's not fixed to my satisfaction. Is there a tracking that goes on with that, so I can see something like how many repeat calls per technician, that kind of stuff?
We're not necessarily tracking repeat calls as much as the user themselves, how many they're submitting. So it's probably being tracked more that way rather than repeat calls.
Right.
So, for the most part, it's been a very low number of that didn't get fixed.
Do you have a satisfaction survey part in the system?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you have a satisfaction survey?
No, actually,
part?
again, it was the sort of more interaction for the staff to look at the ticketing and so forth. That was sort of a stage 2 kind of thing that we were aiming for. Sort of going back to the beginning, we had like everything we were trying to overhaul this year. So those extra bells and whistles that we wanted to add to the ticketing system, it was more critical for us to get the ticketing system in place, and the bells and whistles are coming.
And I love the ticketing system. And let me tell you, you open something up like that, each and every single person thinks about absolutely anything they can put in it. We get everything. That has nothing to do with tech. Also, I just wanted to point that out. So when you do something like this, it's great. But people are like, hey, I need to tell somebody about that. Let me tell the help desk. They'll figure out what to do next. So we troubleshoot a lot of things. Things for facilities, things for Mr. Patron, things for Miss Mullally, like all the time. And just passing on different pieces of information from all walks of life.
A lot of the tickets that I get sent, it's basically just like running a scan or an update on something that teachers could actually do themselves. Some of them just don't have the knowledge, the knowledge of technology and how that program would work to do that.
Do you go and also, can the kids get on and send in their plans, or it's all teacher-based?
I think at the moment we've been passing it through teachers mostly, because again, we were making the interface through email, so and the kids, we did not mass generate emails yet for email accounts for the children yet. So that's
Just to kind of expand on that, so the question kind of is, well, when kids have an IT problem, how do they get help? How do they find out? Part of the reorg was sticking all of the ed tech department in the library media center at our complex, having our one-to-one initiative there, and half of our student population, or a little bit more than half, we felt it was important to house the entire department together in that space in various aspects. So word spreads quickly. One, these are IT kids. Kids, they pass that out really quickly, and I'm sure they can speak to that, both from staff and students alike. Hey, Tom, you're in my class. Hey, I need you to fix this, right? A lot of that going on, as well as the kids know they come in there. The librarians help with that too. Everybody knows where Maria's office is, so they all go over there. And they watch for them and say, hey, I can't get on the Wi-Fi. I need the Wi-Fi password. So it kind of builds a self-culture.
Yeah, everyone in my grade and a few grades below knows that I am like the IT guy.
Yeah.
In our grade. So I didn't even start working with IT until second semester started this year. So everyone first semester would be coming to me with all their problems, and I'd be like, I can't help you. Go to that. So yeah.
Thank you.
So just in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next subject. And any questions for that you may have had more about that, would be happy to answer later. So the next part really, and sort of I touched on at the beginning, was we really didn't know too much about what our infrastructure looked like. We came in and there was a lot of information missing, and it's really no one's specific fault. It was just things get lost in time. If you're not collecting in such a spot, things get lost in time. And so the biggest thing we had to do was go around and really do a solid inventory. It's a very time-consuming piece. So we're going to have Kevin speak to that specific topic, and probably some of our topics later on will sort of address, highlight those issues of why this topic is such a big topic for us.
Okay, so I'm Kevin. When I first got assigned to the tech department, the first task I had to do was set up all the iPads, and we had an overwhelming amount of inventory of devices that we had. As we further increased our range of resources to include iPads and other devices, it is imperative to update our inventory system software to meet all the requirements that we had. The program would have to be capable of tracking IP addressable and non-IP addressable objects. There's also a flexible database design was also crucial to this requirement because we wanted to create attributes the way we wanted. By creating attributes such as building, room location, serial number, manufacturer, model number, and type of device, is much easier to keep track of each device and what they were accomplishing. I made keeping track of surfacing updates a lot easier, as well as increased efficiency for us, as there's a would also have to utilize an open source database so it could be created and accessed with a program such as MySQL. This was a significant requirement, as in the future we would be able to process hardware requirements for state tests. So we would be able to tell what computers in school would be able to use for state testing, how efficient they would be, how long it would take to do those tests, and which computers couldn't run it. So if we had to set up a lab and some computers didn't work, we didn't know about that until the day of or something like that. It was a lot easier to just keep a inventory of these computers, and it would reduce time necessary for that.
It also helps us with budgeting and future forecasting, how that life cycle management piece, how old is this equipment, how many devices are part of the XP problem, for example. I'm sure you have that problem too. So that helps you.
And then mirror that with how many tickets are we getting on those old devices we've inventoried. It all kind of fits together nicely.
It would have to have a built-in system to update the inventory database if the object is being capable of managed remotely, so we know what's updated and what's not. So we can just go in and say, hey, we need to fix all these computers, let's update them to the new stuff. Of course, low cost was a factor. The program we wound up going with was OpenNMS, which was completely free other than if we needed support. It had all the requirements that we were looking for, as well as it came with pre-built virtual servers that we could just download offline. And that just made our jobs a lot simpler with updating and everything, so we went with that. Had everything we were looking for, as well as constantly being updated, it's being developed, and that just increased our desire for that product. And I have to say, going into the tech department and this having been my first task to do with inventory management, I had very little experience with inventory management before this. It was very simple to use and input all the things and search for what you were looking for. So I think that's going to be really beneficial for any department that decides to use something like that.
So did OpenNMS scan your network and pull the IP address, or you just static IP address?
Yes. So, there's lots of dynamic IP addresses around the network. So, I think, in order to sort of tie the inventory system to management, to scanning things, we were in Active Directory, because Active Directory is sort of critical, centralizing our authentication. We decided to name our computers as the asset number. So that way, it was the same key of information in our asset database as it was in Active Directory. So that way, when I searched this, I knew that's exactly that was the device. And when we go, one of our other students actually custom wrote a piece of application that we're going to use so that when we sit down in front of the computer, things move. They move all the time. So we change names. She wrote a program so that we could actually input that data very quickly. It would rewrite the data into a special file, and then we would read that remotely. That's our plan. So that it would be very quickly and easy to change that information if we move it from spot to spot. It just launch the application, input the data, and the inventory would get updated for that one. So that's inventory system is not exactly the newest thing. It's not very glitzy, but it's like a very critical piece for us to understand where things were, and it'll come back around when I start talking about the network a little bit. Next piece that we sort of really wanted to touch on and sort of leads from inventory into what Tom's going to talk about. Even without doing a full inventory, it becomes obvious certain things about your infrastructure that you're not going to be able to do everything. Technology moves very quickly, and we had a lot of needs, and it was going to take us a lot of time to be able to update things. So we had to re-examine how long it was going to take us to get to the next phase of what we wanted to look at. So we really needed to sort of experiment and test other methods that would make us reach our goals a little bit faster. So Tom's going to sort of explain some of the different things that we've experimented with and how that sort of matches against our initial inventory mechanisms.
All right, so we had three major issues which we needed to develop as we moved on and upscaled through our originally small department and expanded, adding the iPads in and adding an inventory system eventually, we're hoping to add emails for students because the emailing system would allow us to have tickets for students as well as student users. As of now, there are no emails for students. We were looking at several options to outsource to, such as Gmail. Google Apps is a very good platform which integrates into Active Directory. Also, Microsoft Office, Office 365 has a integration into our network's Active Directory, which would allow us to kind of outsource our current Exchange server to a sort of cloud environment up at like Microsoft or something, which would be cheaper, and eventually it would be easier in the long run. Although it would take some time to transfer over, it's easier to run somebody else's server because the server we have now running all the mail, it's running out of space. Teachers are limited to something like 100 megabytes of mail. And it just isn't worth it. It's easier to outsource mail. So we looked at Gmail, Office 365, and I think there was a couple others. But we really wanted to give everybody an email and stop limiting them on space. So although some parts of the town weren't able to do this, such as the town hall, because they needed their own server, because it needed to be very secure, because they were talking about certain issues, or I'm not quite sure, but
Police stuff,
Yeah.
important stuff. Like police.
they needed to be ultra secure, like Ms. Kennedy said, police stuff.
Tax records.
Yeah. So we obviously couldn't be setting that down by, they needed to stay in our local network where we know it wouldn't be sniffed by anybody. So eventually we're hoping to add in all students to that, so they can have their email, and this will allow us to integrate our students into the technology department and allow them to better communicate with their teachers. Also, we had the iPads, which was a pretty cool thing. I thought it was awesome that we got a huge grant, so we got like 200 iPads, right? Or way more than that for our students. But we had a huge influx of iPads, but we didn't really know how to administer it all. So we originally looked at the AirWatch system, which is cool, but students can just drop right off the security network and they can install whatever apps they want, which iPads are meant for education. So we don't want them installing Twitter or Facebook because we want them staying on task. So AirWatch, unfortunately, you can literally press a button and say remove profile from the iPad, and they no longer are on the administered network by the IT. So we eventually learned about Cisco Meraki.
It's a pricey solution too, I might add, right? Bob Carroll, business manager? Pricey solution, AirWatch.
Yeah. And Meraki offered us a free solution, which was better. So it was obviously a better economic, and it's a more functional system. So that's what we're kind of moving towards now. We didn't really have a whole lot of time to plan for the iPad initiative.
I'm just trying to get that
Oh.
I'm teasing her.
Yeah. What was good about AirWatch though was it integrated in with our inventory system for each iPad because we labeled them on the back with like serial numbers, and each iPad is hard coded with a serial number, which would allow us to track it. Like, where is it going? Is it leaving school? Is it really stolen? If a kid reports it's stolen, or is it just sitting at his house or lost?
I think another thing we would like to touch on with the iPads, and that Tom worked pretty extensively with, was trying to make, because we still had a lot of apps that weren't necessarily iPad-based or iOS-based. So Tom did an extensive search, and it ties back into our inventory system again. It was obvious we could not upgrade all our student computers. There's lots of apps that the teachers wished to use that still sort of ran on a Windows platform. There was not much of a chance to get this done in a very timely fashion. It would probably be years before we were able to acquire the funding in order to do them. So Tom worked extensively in testing, reusing some of that very old hardware that it was well past its end of life, but using a very slimmer operating system. We were using remote desktop technologies, remote app technologies. So he tested those across, running on a Linux kiosk, essentially. That's all it ran, was that remote app. And he tested it on the iPad. So that was quite a lot of it. We spent most of the semester writing, setting up that system, or making sure that he could replicate that system, testing it on the hardware. That was probably one of the most critical things he could do is to test that particular feature, to see the interaction or the interoperability, that we could still reuse those old apps that we were using that the teachers wanted to use, and see if, which direction, if that was very viable. And this is probably the biggest thing is it viable? Is it a viable direction to go in? Because he could have done this experiment and found out it wasn't worth it, that it was too much time consuming. And there's some of these things that we were sort of approaching is that it wasn't worth it. It became not worth it for us, and we quickly switched directions and went a different way. I'll cut that short for the time being. I apologize. But so actually, Tom sort of touched on the MDM solution. So this is part of this infrastructure piece that's very critical to us was the iPads. So managing them is not so easy. So just about any of those, any mobile device becomes a lot more difficult to take care of. There's less there to be able to sort of control. What we're going to have Lyle talk about is sort of our experiences with that, and what we originally envisioned and how that sort of changed over the course of time very quickly. So we'll have Lyle talk about that.
So obviously, with the implementation of all of these iPads, we needed a system to be able to inventory all of the devices so that we knew which end user was assigned to which device. And we needed to be able to deploy software and manage the software that the end users install themselves. Well, as stated before, we ran into quite a few issues with that. One of the biggest being that the Apple ID program is not a hierarchy system. What that means is basically if we install an application with a specific ID, that ID is the only ID that can then update those applications. And without being able to share the password for that Apple ID, it makes it almost impossible for anybody other than our team itself to manage and update those applications. We also found that updating the software or retracting any software that end users have installed that we don't want them to have was also not really possible. So the students, if their iPad was locked down because they had software that was not approved by our team, they had to physically come seek us out and find us in order to figure out, why can't I use my iPad? Oh, well, you've got Snapchat installed, and that's not an approved app.
It was something we couldn't automate. We could not automate that mechanism to go out and retrieve and uninstall that software. It just doesn't exist on this platform.
We also found that the management system for the profiles was very buggy. One of the issues that we ran into is anytime that we wanted to update, modify, or maybe add a new profile, one of the bugs was that the iPad would essentially completely lose its connection to the wireless network. And that became quite a nuisance because now we have 140 sophomores coming to us on a regular basis saying, hey, I lost my network connectivity, I can't access anything. And it was a very tedious process to have to sit there and constantly put those passwords back in order to connect them up to the network. With all of these issues, we obviously needed to be able to modify what we were currently doing to meet our needs as a district. And of course, cost effectiveness played a big part in that, which is why we decided to switch to the Meraki Cisco system. They currently offer a free system right now that is comparable to what we are currently using with AirWatch. And we've decided to go with a fully managed system that does not allow students does not allow the students to install any applications. We'll mainly be using the Meraki system to audit and inventory the iPads, and then we plan on using Apple Configurator to actually deploy those applications. That way we can make sure that the students are not installing anything that we don't want them to install.
So that change is part of a pilot, certainly. You know, you think you go out, you think you've got all the best decisions, you got the best plan, and then you start rolling down the path, and then you're like, ooh, ooh. You know, those things kind of bump up along the way. You know, you do your research, you do as best you can. So we'll physically recollect every single one of our devices again to, you know, Meraki guys on those, I say. You know, uninstall an AirWatch and throw them in Meraki, and it's just a high-touch environment. We've got to touch every single device to make that happen, to make sure that it has what we need on it. So.
And why aren't you deploying your apps through Meraki? That's the other thing.
Well, the reason that we're not doing it through Meraki is because one of the issues that we found is if you lock down the iPad so that an Apple ID cannot be used, it also disables the ability to push apps out wirelessly. So what we found that we ended up having to do is if somebody required a new application, we would have to disable the profile and then physically go out, touch all those iPads, install the software, and then re-enable that profile that does not allow them to install. So the easiest method there was to just completely lock down the iPad, and then on a semester or quarterly basis.
And let me just say a couple things about that. And, you know, our high school principals in the room. It's not the vision we wanted. And have we not networked with other districts who told us the same thing? And we said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to just let them have Apple IDs. Let them explore. Let them be. Let them do. This is going to be great.
Sort of dumb switches. And they were chained all over the place. So you would, you know, from the router down, you could talk about 4 hops down to a switch, right? So we had lots of switching loops that were going on as well. So it was really examining all that physical topology, re-inventorying everything we had, you know, where was it in its life cycle. So, you know, we were able to start a new initiative to rip out this entire infrastructure, redo it. So not necessarily the cabling, but the switching infrastructure so that we could support the wireless better. And you can see how everything is sort of going, how critical it's sort of becoming to us. You know, testing, I remember we had a network outage and one of the teachers was sort of in the hallway saying, this is a week before testing. You know, so he was very, you know, upset about that this outage had occurred. You know, so we don't want to disturb testing either, because every time we disturb testing, it sets us back. We did not have capacity for our labs. So having an outage that might take them all out, well, that was not really sort of acceptable. We don't want testing to go on forever. So we're going to really sort of redo all our closets and put in a new switching infrastructure. So the next sort of phase to doing this is we're getting new switches. We're going to go with Cisco devices, 2960Xs, and the reason why we sort of chose them is because we had previous switch infrastructure that is exactly like I described. It was a chained infrastructure. We didn't have enough infrastructure to completely attach every switch directly to the router. So what winds up happening is you start chaining them from one area to another, and that's not a very good design. The possibilities of people creating a switching loop are very high. It happens quite often. So we were going to move to an environment where the switches are stackable, yet it's a fabric base, so that if I lose a switch, actually the other switch could take over for it. Not just management pieces, but actually its backbone as well. So I could actually lose a switch out of the stack and be able to fail through. And there's quite a few manufacturers that make that kind of mechanism. Cisco's not unique in that mechanism, but that was a feature that we really wanted to have a little bit more resiliency in our network and not have this terrible layer 2 connection stream in the closets. And not only that, but our next stage that we were very interested in is in the town as well, is that we wanted to go to a voice over IP system as well. So, you know, we've had experience in doing some of that before, and having an infrastructure that's more resilient in the closet is sort of imperative. You got to sort of approach every call as a 911. So because you don't want a whole section of a building not having phones working. If you have an outage, and they're always going to happen, you don't want to be that guy that says the whole building was quiet. So that was sort of really important to us, is to add this resiliency into the network. So every closet is going to be ripped out and sort of redone. Next sort of piece about that. That's all the time. Okay. So I think probably the biggest thing that I was sort of approaching here is that with our iPad solution, it becomes very obvious that you cannot use a shared password or shared password system for your wireless. With all the students, password recovery is a constant thing. You just constantly are changing passwords, resetting passwords. Any shared password is not secure. It's not. You might as well call it not a password, right? So, we want to make them more self-serviceable. So if we go to an 802.1x where we make them authenticate to get on the network, that's where they can sort of self-service themselves and get back on the network. And obviously, they're going to fall off the network because of the bugs that we've been running into. They're going to want to bring their own devices and be able to connect them to the network, to be able to contact the teachers' iPads. So we're moving in this direction with consolidating all these things so that we can have a single platform. So these control mechanisms would work properly. We would be reproducible. If we had many different types of devices in the network, it makes it that much more difficult to do a control this kinds of things.
We'll certainly be here for questions. We appreciate your